Chapter 9. Mezcal Menace. They'd been relaxing in the back garden for around an hour now. Andy plucked up the courage to get to know Freddy in more detail. He had been distracting him with small talk for the past hour or so, ever since they'd moved on from looking at his photography and other art and decided to relax and take in the gentle heat of the summer evening. The scent of brine on his fingers from the olives was distracting him, so he nervously reapplied some tea tree hand moisturizer for the third time in the space of 5 minutes. By this point, they'd both reached an impasse, as it wasn't clear how they were supposed to carry on this altercation. Andy didn't want Freddy to leave, but he also didn't want to sound desperate and tell him that he would be willing to spend the evening together. He could tell that Freddy was comfortable and far more relaxed now, but still couldn't figure out whether he was still drinking and talking to him simply because he had no other choice and didn't know how to escape the situation. "So you're single then?" Andy asked, knowing full well that he was, but using it as a way to segue into his next agenda, trying to ascertain whether Freddy was potentially eligible and therefore boyfriend material. Sufficiently lubricated with his fourth glass of verve, Freddy answered candidly, casually using his glass as to gesture openness, gently spilling some of its contents. "A bit, yeah, tragically. Well, no, not tragically, to be honest. Rowing takes up a lot of time and all those damn work meetings get to me. Most of the time I'm too exhausted to be able to go on dates and stuff. Guys are complicated, too." "Girls are worse, sometimes," Andy responded, gently mopping up some of the spilt wine. He quickly replenished Freddy's glass with some fresh wine. He smiled as he did so, catching his eye and smiling in a suggestive kind of way. "Want a shot?" Andy asked. "Sure. What do you have?" He wasn't sure why he'd offered it, but it seemed appropriate. He hated talking about romantic topics and didn't want to explore this too much further. He was a jealous type and didn't really want to cross into friendship territory by comparing their love lives, or lack thereof. It was a bit crass to discuss hooking up and dates. It was safer to suggest more alcohol and have a good time on their own terms, without worrying about the outside world. "I've got some mezcal. I brought it back from Mexico a few weeks ago. I actually haven't touched it yet, so you can be the first to try a new bottle. Sound good?" "Fuck yeah. Sounds bloody awesome. Love that stuff." The fact he knew what mezcal was, a rarity in London, meant that Freddy wasn't just some dumb hoorah Henry who only knew how to guzzle champagne and drink in cheap gay bars. It certainly elevated his opinion of him. Now that Andy had ascertained that Freddy was indeed a catch, incredibly good-looking and also cultured, he decided to up the ante slightly. Shots were a good start, but he'd have to start pushing him a little more. "I'll be back in 5. You good?" "Sure," Freddy responded, who by this point was reclining in his chair, halfway through munching an olive with his eyes half closed. He was clearly comfortable in this environment. This made Andy quite happy, especially as he was extremely fond of Freddy after having hung out for the past 2.5 hours. Seeing that Freddy was sufficiently relaxed, he headed back inside. His flat wasn't huge, but it had a decent kitchen and massive front room, which was perfect for displaying his most recent photography and some of his older work. It meant that he couldn't display all of his work, though, in part due to reasons of proprietary and not wanting to scare his ex-girlfriend, who wasn't particularly happy with all of his photography. It had actually been one of the reasons they'd ended the relationship, though he wouldn't tell Freddy that, of course. He could have found something extra provocative, such as some of the fully nude photos he'd captured of himself, including a few of him rock hard, with a cock ring, baseball cap, and nothing else on. Aside from him sitting there with his legs apart, reclining in bed with his cock in his hand. That could have worked well, if Freddy was going to turn out to be a quick fuck. No, it would take something else. He decided to bring out a photo collection that he had put together, but at the time had been too scared to show anyone, including some of the original prints that meant a lot to him. His family had originally come from Mexico, which meant that he was only the second generation to be born in the UK. He was proud of his family history, but downplayed the Mexican ancestry due to the political climate in England at the time. He preferred showing his more mainstream stuff, but did eventually want to explore his family history and how that intersected with modern society and second and third generation migrant families. Not exactly riveting stuff to most people, but something that could resonate with a lot of British people, especially those from migrant backgrounds. He picked one photograph which he had planned to give to Freddy as a gift. It was probably worth around £400 or so, meaning it wasn't one of his prized photos, but explained some of his family history. It was special as it was of his old family estate and lands which had been destroyed in some revolution many years ago. It meant a lot to him and he hoped that it might be of interest to Freddy. It was his way of testing the waters and seeing whether he was simply a quick fuck or could be something more. As he returned to the kitchen, photo in hand, he took the mezcal out the freezer. By this point, he'd actually become slightly more nervous, so anything sexual was far from his mind. That was not his goal, although he could imagine Freddy was a good kisser. He had beautiful lips. He obviously had never heard of lip balm or moisturiser as they were slightly cracked and rough. That added to his masculinity and was somewhat attractive, even if it wasn't good for his skin. Regardless, while Andy did want to kiss him, he wanted to find the appropriate time and ensure that when it happened, the aftermath wasn't going to be a mistake, and that he would actually see him again in a romantic way. In other words, he didn't want a one-night stand.